Martel, who joins me. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the representatives of COMELEC, the ICT, and the other representatives of government agencies. And of course, the NGOs, civil society, and stakeholders in the electoral processes, like every citizen of the Republic. Thank you very much. The 8th public hearing of the Committee of Electoral Reform and People's Participation with the Committee on Science and Technology is hereby called to order. And the chair declares the quorum with the presence of Senator Villar. And I think that Senator Villar and Senators Recto and Senator Angara have also evinced their presence, or although only representatives are here for the moment. May I therefore call on my committee secretary, Attorney Dana Alberto, to acknowledge the presence of our resource persons, to remind all those of the House rules for the first virtual meeting or hybrid meeting of the Committee on Electoral Reforms by video conferencing and others who are in the vicinity of the Senate. Okay, Attorney Dana, please.
Thank you, Senator Marcos. Good morning. The Committee on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation would like to acknowledge our distinguished guests, namely from Commission on Elections, Director James Arthur B. Jimenez, from the Department of Information and Communication Technology, Yusek Emmanuel Rey Caintic, Director Jose Carlos Reyes, Engineer Ariel Rodriguez, Mr. Florante Espiritu, Attorney Elias Omar Sana, Mr. Alex Dita, Director Leo Urbistondo Jr., from Department of Foreign Affairs, Acting Vice Chairman Edgardo O. Castro, Ms. Riza Jamila S. San Juan, from DBM, Department of Budget and Management, Ms. Michelle Calica, from Department of Education, Mr. Abram Abanil, from Lente Philippines, Attorney Helen Graido, from TPCRV, Mr. Romel Bernardo, from University of Massachusetts at Amherst, Professor Jonathan Ong, from NAMFREL, Mr. J.R. Contreras. May I know who else has not been called, please? Okay, that will be all, ma'am.
Yes, thank you very much. We have two separate items on the agenda.
Kami nila Leo, ay, walang labas niyo.
If you could turn off, please, all your other devices, because we seem to be getting too much ambient sound. But let me say that today we have two separate bills and resolutions pending on different topics. The first one from our Senate President Pro Tempore, Ralph Recto, urging the Commission on Elections and the DICT to devise some tool to detect foreign interference in elections. So may I, of course, put a little context. As we are well aware, as early as 2017, there was the beginning of what has now become known as the techlash, or the backlash against big tech. And this certainly began with taxation issues in Ireland against Apple and several other companies. Thereafter, it evolved into antitrust issues in the United States. And of course, of late, the most notorious takedown has been the Twitter and Facebook and other accounts of President Donald Trump of the United States. Curiously, we have now seen a backlash to this techlash deriving from the Europeans led by Prime Minister Angela Merkel of Germany, who immediately said that this was a problematic takedown the ban being perhaps a threat to the fundamental right to free speech. We also heard that Prime Minister Macron of Paris, of France, echoed this European sentiment by saying that unlike the United States, regular audits and more transparency should be imposed by state regulators on technology companies. The issue in Europe has been heightened by the recent imprisonment of the Russian dissident Navalny, who is also very concerned about state interference in these affairs. So we would like to call on Professor Jonathan Ong, given his time zone where it's quite late in the evening, and we'd like to understand his conclusion that in fact the Philippines is patient zero in the global information epidemic, given that the combination of influencers, bloggers, fake accounts have weaponized social media to incur distrust. I'm not certain that I've actually summarized the reading correctly, so let us call on Professor Jonathan Ong.
Thank you so much for having me, Senator Marcos. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, it's 9 p.m. here in Virginia, and happy to share with you my research. Together with colleagues in De La Salle University, also Australian National University, I've been doing research on Philippine elections and social media in elections. And of course, our first investigation was looking at disinformation campaigns in the 2016 presidential election, but we also examined the 2019 elections and what has changed from 2016 to 2019. So it's of course commonplace to say that the Philippines is patient zero in this fight against this disinformation. The whole notion of troll armies being unleashed online is a common expression. Our argument in our research is that it's important to understand how the Philippines actually mixes and merges a whole range of disinformation operators. On one hand, there are those private industry actors who serve as political consultants of politicians who mastermind campaigns. So hindi lang naman siya digital media and social media, but the entire array of mainstream media working with journalists and seeding narratives using a combination of campaigns on mainstream media, press releases, false speech, and these kinds of activities, but also using influencers and also micro level influencers on social media. So a lot of these campaigns are strategically coordinated with somebody at the top, together with an army of influencers. And they could be like celebrities online, people who are popular online, but they can also be micro level influencers. They could be operating parody accounts or meme accounts na parang akala nyo nagpapatawa lang sila, but at some point they're also seeding memes and posts promoting a politician or attacking their opponents, right? And then at the lower level are those fake account operators. So the argument in our report in 2019, and so I'll just summarize briefly, I know this is going to be a long meeting, is that we haven't really done enough from 2016 to 2019. So parang nag-flourish palalo yung disinformation industry. So in spite of fact-checking from journalists, in spite of academic research that we try to do independently, there hasn't been enough focus and responsibility assigned to people at the top. Parang nakilala po natin certain names whom we call fake news purveyors, fake news queens. However, we haven't really come up with a comprehensive enough framework that will penalize and really hurt people's finances and really introduce financial disincentives to PR firms, advertising agencies, high-level political consultants who are actually those who are marshaling all of the resources of all these online trolls and influencers. And so yung argument po namin in our report is for the most part, disinformation is actually pretty local. Even though it is important for us to secure our online spaces from foreign actors interfering in our electoral discourse, it's important to acknowledge how a lot of our disinformation is locally produced. However, and I just wanted to say this before we engage with the theme of foreign interference, is that my research that uncovered a network of accounts coming from China, and Facebook had taken down these accounts. And it was quite interesting the timing in which they released this research. They released this research over a year after our elections in 2019, and parang a few months before the US elections. And so one could be thinking about to whom was Facebook performing their accountability and responsibility to? Were they really being accountable to us in the Philippines or to the US electoral process? And then number two is that ang nakita naming examples of foreign interference in the Philippines was actually foreign entrepreneurs working with Filipino PR firms and Filipino political consultants. So these are entrepreneurs who have very who are invested, who wanted to advance business interests, infrastructure projects locally, and they were funding the digital campaigns of certain mayoral candidates in the Philippines. So local level campaigns, not so much national. And so here, the before we get to kind of like the digital operations angle, there's a question here around a gap in our transparency mechanisms around accepting foreign funding. Do we have enough kind of audit mechanisms to create disclosure mechanisms na natatrack natin kung saan nanggagaling ang pondo, ang funding ng local politicians, and kung interest ba to ng ibang bansa? So I'll end there, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yes, thank you very much. And if my colleagues will allow, we recognize the presence of Senator Francis Tolentino, and we welcome his input into this debate that's very new and vibrant. I'm a little confused, Professor Ong, by your conclusion. What do you recommend? It appears that you caution against government regulation, and that in fact you say, on one hand, we have not done enough, and these purveyors have actually flourished. On the other hand, you are saying that we cannot fight illiberal practices of disinformation with illiberal responses. So what is it that you'd like us to do? Economic, diplomatic, and or criminal penalties. So it appears that at least with big tech and Facebook, they're open to regulation from states and governments. In your case, you seem to be saying that we shouldn't do that. Am I
So-
reading this correctly?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Senator Marcos. Yeah, as an academic, we're very careful, we're very slow and nuanced in our recommendations. So, ang argument po namin is, yes, we do need interventions. We actually need a lot more research and multi-stakeholder collaborations of academics, journalists, government actors, cybersecurity experts, lawyers, and the COMELEC to be working with each other, finding ways to support COMELEC, finding ways to support cybersecurity investigators. However, we caution against any legislation that might introduce more harms into the process by and that could include exerting too much control over social media conversations, such that it might lead to self-censorship, chilling effects, and silencing.
Yes.
If it becomes too overly punitive. So it's about, so ma'am, if I can just summarize, it's more about audit mechanisms where people, researchers, journalists, governments could be providing checks and balances for each other. So having multiple sets of eyes on the same data, as opposed to controlling the decision making of who to take down, who to ban from the platform to just one person or to one entity. So that's what we're most concerned about. So I hope that answers your question.
Actually, I think the developments recently, post President Trump's ban, were on the other end. It was the state that was concerned that overly punitive action derived from big tech. Baliktad, parang ganon. So nagkakabaliktaran kung sino ang dapat mag-regulate. There's an element of self-regulation. And Facebook has actually sent us a position paper saying that they would be open to economic, diplomatic, criminal penalties. And at the same time, I think we are all with you in the regular audits that are necessary, as well as the transparency mechanisms, information requirements, and information sharing requirements, and research that are necessary. And this is the tack that the Europeans have taken. The Americans have been more laissez-faire, but I think with these recent developments, papakialaman na rin nila yan ng husto. So thank you very much, and we agree that a very careful, very conservative, and nuanced approach should be taken, given that this may infringe on everyone's fundamental right to free speech. Thank you. Are there any questions from Senator Tolentino or Senator Coco? In which case, we could also proceed to hear the other resource persons. Pakinggan muna natin. Ayan, si Senator Coco Arian.
I'm just curious. Professor Ong is based in the U.S. And how are you able to detect the so-called influence or participation at the local level pa of some of these entrepreneurs? I thought you would be able to remotely detect at the national level, but at the local level, I'm surprised. How did you do this,
sure.
sir?
Yeah, and I would be very happy to share our methodology. So I'm an academic researcher. I'm Filipino. Our 2016 research was based on ethnographic research. I was in the Philippines. I had local research teammates. I had an academic who was also based in De La Salle University. So what we did was actually interview and begin with interviews with political consultants and ask them about the process of conducting a digital campaign. Paano ba nag-a-assemble ng social media campaign? Sino-sino yung kasama sa team? Paano kayo nagbabayaran? Ano po yung kontrata? And also, can you show us examples of yung mga social media accounts? And through that process, we also followed online. We call this digital ethnography. And so qualitative method po siya, where we would be watching a lot of YouTube videos. We would try to get to know the different personalities of people online para alam namin yung narratives, kung ano yung nasasabi nila. And that's what I also wanted to address with regard to the proposed bill of Senator Recto. He talks about developing a tool for monitoring disinformation. Academics would argue more than like one technological tool or fix. This is not solved by technology alone. This is solved by people who understand stories, narratives, and the entire scene of the in the Philippines. So hindi lang po siya isang tool that will track or extract material and data, which also raises a lot of data privacy concerns. We're very cautious about whether our decision to publicize certain kinds of information of those that we were able to track. So I hope you find a way to also work with researchers who are very ethical in their approach, that are not really just investing on one data system or tool that claims to be doing that. So that's a lot of hype that we try to step back from.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We recognize the presence of Senator Cynthia Villar. Thank you very much for joining us. If there are no other questions from the other senators, has Facebook, Secretary Dana, has Facebook sent a representative, or is it merely a position paper that was submitted?
They only sent a position paper, ma'am. They sent their regrets yesterday. And ma'am, Senator Revilla is also present now.
Oh, Senator Revilla. Okay, I don't seem to see him yet. Okay, thank you very much, Senator Revilla. With that, perhaps we can invite the COMELEC to comment on the resolution. After all, it's both COMELEC and DICT being instructed to come up with these magic tools and devices, certainly not a silver bullet by any means, but a combination of efforts. So baka gusto ninyo mag-comment, Attorney James? Wala po kayong audio.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Okay.
And thank you very much for the invitation. Our commissioners are asking leave because we have an unpacked session today, and we are deep in the preparations for the Palawan plebiscite. So they sent me here to present a position supporting the call for this resolution, for this course of action to be taken. Democracy is under siege, ironically, from the very technology that was supposed to turbocharge the democratization of society. Beginning with the national and local elections of 2016, social media has increasingly been used to A, unduly influence voter turnout, second, obfuscate the information environment around elections, and third, basically erode public trust in the electoral system, political leadership, and government institutions. For this reason, the COMELEC believes that PSRN 542 is timely and relevant, particularly in view of the potential for coordinated, inauthentic social media behavior to influence the coming 2022 national and local elections. The response that the COMELEC sees to this threat of cyber-enabled interference entails three broad intervention categories. First is deterrence, second is mitigation, and the third is education. For deterrence, the COMELEC calls attention to the Foreign Intervention Clause of the Omnibus Election Code. Section 81 of Batas Pambansa Bilang 881 makes it unlawful for any foreigner, whether judicial or natural person, to aid any candidate or political party directly or indirectly, or take part in or influence in any manner any election, or to contribute or make any expenditure in connection with any election campaign or partisan political activity. While it can be argued that this provision is broad enough to encompass cyber-enabled interference in the election process, there is some question whether it can be made to apply to the use of social media. It is recommended, therefore, that Congress reassess BP 881's interference clause to take into consideration new developments in communications technology. As for the social media platforms, while Facebook has in the past proven itself willing to work with the COMELEC, the Commission feels that much more can be done in the matter of enforcing the rules that require political advertisements to disclose ownership of the ads. Similarly, the Commission believes that social media platforms can be more responsive to take down requests for violations of campaign rules and regulations. In the matter of mitigation, interagency election integrity task forces might be a good idea because the COMELEC lacks the resources and expertise to actively defend against coordinated inauthentic behavior. it is recommended that some sort of interagency election integrity task force be established to assist and perhaps advise the COMELEC in dealing with cyber-related interference in the electoral process. As for the social media platforms, they have, of their own initiative, recently undertaken measures to combat the spread of disinformation. By convening a technical working group composed of the COMELEC and representatives of these social media platforms, it might be possible to increase the efficacy of those anti-misinformation measures, as well as to discuss possible passage of legislation. First, requiring political advertisers to adhere to a set of integrity standards. Second, requiring the creation of a publicly accessible archive of all advertising on the platform. And finally, requiring social media platforms to make public advertisement targeting algorithms, to make those public. And finally, in the matter of education, since disinformation campaigns target the public, no response would be complete if it did not include a program to educate the public to become more discerning consumers of information. To this end, it is recommended that the Department of Information and Communications Technology undertake a massive and comprehensive education campaign intended to improve the capabilities of the public to detect, reject, and report disinformation. I would beg the committee to remember that this is not a specific nor an exclusive problem of the COMELEC. Coordinate the responses of government agencies to identify disinformation campaigns, and finally to raise awareness about disinformation and how to fight it in general. Respectfully submitted from the Commission on Elections.
Yes. Thank you. Shall we listen to the ICT and DOST first, colleagues, before we pose any further questions on the government sector? Perhaps we can call on the ICT next. Yes, Secretary Dana. Sino yung representative ng DICT na narito?
Undersecretary Emmanuel Rey Caintic po, ma'am.
Okay, Yusek Kaintik, please please make the DICT position. Kaya ba natin to? I
Good
think COMELEC has
morning,
been very candid in saying that they simply do not have the technical capacity, and they are recommending that in fact an integrity task force for elections, interagency election integrity task force. Nagpapasaklolo na yata sila sa inyo. So anong masasabi at maitutulong naman ninyo?
Good morning, Madam Chair and honorable senators. Thank you for inviting us in this meeting. As for the position of the DICT, we concur with the need for this resolution and support it completely. As to the suggestion of Director James of creating an interagency a task force for the integrity task force, we will also fully support that. In fact, in terms of tools, ma'am, we have the tools to help in the detection and possibly also look detection as well as initial investigation to the purveyors of these fake news and other manipulations for the elections. We have the necessary tools, but we would need the proper mandate to do an investigation because the Cybersecurity Bureau does not have a law enforcement jurisdiction. As for suspicions of manipulations, we just need, with this task force, it would be best that we could, this task force would serve as the starting point for the lodging of an investigation. And with that, the DICT can help in the, sabi ni Sir James, detection, in also put the deterrence for the proliferation of such fake news and other manipulations. As for the education po, we can also help in the upcoming elections as we will help also in cyber hygiene as well as the conduct of the proper conduct in social media, Madam Chair. Thank you po, Madam Chair. We will
Thank you,
submit our
Manny.
position paper after this meeting, ma'am.
Yusek Money, maraming salamat. Pero tama ba yung narinig ko that we have the tools? Parang punong-puno kayo ng kumpiyansa samantalang sa Amerika, sa Europe, medyo nangangarag nga sila dyan eh. Bakit tayo kayang-kaya natin? Totoo kaya yan? Siguro kapag
Ma'am,
narito si Professor Jonathan Ong, ibida mo naman sa amin kung ano yung mga tools na kakayaning gamitin.
Sige po. Our cybersecurity management platform includes the OSINT tools and WebIn tools. But what we need are the guidance kung sino yung mga suspicious na mga pages, of which we will need law enforcement help kasi we are using this to safeguard our critical information infrastructure. That's the mandate of the Cybersecurity Bureau. But if need be, with the help of the law enforcement agencies like NBI or PNP, ginawa na po namin yan dito sa nung latest na COVID, yung last year, di ba? Maraming mga fake news. So, yun po ang gamit namin. So we can do the initial investigation. Malalaman namin kung nasaan banda ang halimbawa, given may nag-purvey ng fake news, malalaman namin to some extent sino yung underlying profiles, and we can help submit this to Facebook or Twitter to help them curtail yung proliferation of such fake news.
Pero in the
Meron po
first
tayong
case, ang
tools.
sinasabi mo, dapat i-identify yung mga suspect ng NBI at ng PNP. Kumbaga, itutulong
Apo, ma'am.
nila tapos hahanapin ninyo online.
Apo, ma'am. Tama po, Madam Chair, because we're not in the concept naman of witch hunting or hunting. Kailangan may mag-complain tapos we can investigate further. And then once we gather the case, we will help the necessary law enforcement agencies submit this to the appropriate channel. So, pwede nating tulungan ang Facebook to cut down such purveyors of fake news and whatever po.
Okay, so pwede natin tawagin ngayon. Thank you very much, Yusek Kaintik, and we can call the OST and the FA. Nandiyan ba, Comsec Dina, yung DOST? Kung may idadagdag sila?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Rage Calyao po.
Okay, Mr. Calyao, meron ba kayong position dito sa resolution ni Senator Recto?
Si Engineer Banson rin po, ma'am, is online.
Okay, if anyone from the DOST could simply react or respond to this resolution as well as the positions already made by different resource persons, please.
Yes, good morning, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Thank you very much for this meeting. And the DOST does not yet have an official position on this, but we do agree that fake news and disinformation is a big threat to democracies worldwide. So especially during election time,
What can DOST contribute to the effort to detect false information and put a stop to this?
Yes, ma'am. We also believe that parang technologically, there is probably no single silver bullet yet that we can develop that will immediately solve the problem overnight. We agree with the suggestions of COMELEC, the three-pronged framework. DOST can help on the education aspect, as we believe maybe that is the long-term solution to this problem. We have people who can work on the educational campaign with the ICT and with COMELEC on this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So it's more in the aspect of media and digital literacy that you can come in, not in the actual deterrence, litigation, and other aspects. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. We can support in those other areas. We believe it's more in the mandate of the ICT.
Sige, okay. Maraming salamat. At siguro pwede natin tawagan rin yung DFA in as much as may foreign interference na pinag-uusapan. Is there COMSEC, a DFA representative? I think I see some familiar faces or familiar names at least.
Yes, ma'am. Acting Vice Chairman Edgardo O. Castro and Ms. Risa Jamila S. San Juan po, ma'am.
Sige, can someone from the DFA please reply, particularly with regard to the possible diplomatic and international sanctions on violators? DFA, please. Yes, COMSEC. Is there anyone online from the DFA? Si Andre Bauson, is that correct? DFA, nariyan ba kayo?
Good morning, ma'am. I'm Andre Bauzon. I'm from the Legislative Liaison Office. I'll try to get in touch with our OVS, our Overseas Voting Secretariat Chair, Mr. Castro. I think he's there.
Yes,
Sir,
okay. Director Castro, please, if you're online, can you help us here? It's not yet with the absentee voting, but we are still dealing with foreign intervention in terms of digital platforms. Wala tayong mahanap. O, sige.
Hello. I'm
Ayun. Yes.
thank you very much, ma'am, Madam Chair, and thank you for the invitation to attend this hearing. I apologize; it took me a while to get in. I'm not too familiar with this platform of
Okay.
WebEx. The Department of Foreign Affairs at this moment does not really have an official position. It is a rather new issue.
That's right.
And the Department of Foreign Affairs Overseas Voting Secretariat mainly takes its cue from COMELEC. While at this point, we can start studying within the department the foreign aspect, the international law implications. We would like to echo the recommendations of COMELEC, wherein the departments with more expertise, departments and agencies with more expertise in cybersecurity join us in a interagency task force to be able to address the issues more thoroughly.
I think what Professor Jonathan Ong, as well as the Facebook position, indicate is that they need the DFA for certain diplomatic sanctions, perhaps, or some kind of negotiations. It's very, very clear for the first takedown that occurred in March of 2019 by Facebook that payments were made in US dollars, in Saudi Riyal, and that payments were also made in Chinese yuan. So is there anything that the DFA with our representatives in these countries can do?
Oh, that is something that we would have to be studying, ma'am. As we have not had the chance to consult with our Office of Legal Affairs at the moment. And as a result, the DFA does not have an official position on this matter yet.
Okay, we'd be very grateful if you could have a quick look at it, and if there were any diplomatic actions that we could undertake, so that we could quickly incorporate that, whether in the bill or in the institution of a task force for this purpose. Thank you. And with that, I think we've finished the government agencies that are involved in this problem and call on the PPCRV, NAMFREL, Lente, Democracy Watch, SENPEG, AES Watch, and other NGOs concerned with election integrity. If they would like to add anything to the discussion, please, you are invited now. Please turn off your other devices as I seem to be hearing sound from somewhere. Yes, Committee Secretary, does anyone wish to add?
Any resource persons po?
PPCRB.
Yeah, yung ating mga usual suki na mga stakeholders, ang mga NGOs. While we're waiting, perhaps Professor Ong, as final Philip, you've sent me a message here with some questions for COMELEC, for spokesman Jimenez. So perhaps you can posit them yourself. I think his concern is to avoid a highly politicized framework and to define the academic research contribution that can be made. Is that correct? So,
Yeah.
Jonathan, please.
Sure. Thank you so much, Senator. My question to Mr. Emmanuel on the ICT is the bill seems to have a very narrow definition of coordinated inauthentic behavior that ascribes this activity to foreign bad actors. However, from how you retold your examples, you seem to suggest or define bad actors as local operators. So, what exactly is the scope of the bill? And is there a desire to expand? Its current narrow focus. And then the other question is to Mr. Jimenez of COMELEC of how can we help in the academic community to provide a multi-pronged approach to help you at different levels of digital literacy, but also to highlight those vulnerabilities of when certain kinds of regulatory measures might introduce more harm to the electoral process. Thank you.
Thanks. We invite Yusek Mani as well as spokesman Jimenez to respond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our capability to what we mean to say is that the capability naman of the ICT Cybersecurity Bureau, assuming there's already a proper law enforcement docket, no, it's an investigative docket. We're able to help determine whether or not posts are actually coordinated inauthentic behaviors, CIBs, and then we can also lodge that complaint, help lodge that complaint to Facebook's CIB department. At ang tanong mo is if we're gonna focus on local, no sir, we are able to see whether or not it's actually a coordinated attack from a foreign IP address. So of course, if we see that it is actually coming from a foreign source, nakita namin that it's actually CIB coordinated from a certain rogue state or sponsored state, then of course we'll also all the more raise it to Sina Facebook, which we are already in contact with. I'm in contact with the Facebook people po. Thank you po, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity. Mr. Ong, thank you for that question. Off the top of my head, I really can't define what sort of entry the academe would like into this problem with the COMELEC, but certainly we would need all the help we can get in educating the public, especially on media hygiene and information literacy. The COMELEC itself has its own literacy campaign. We sort of call it timeline mo, linis mo. Basically calling on people to purge their own timelines of false or misleading information. But again, like I said, I apologize. It's off the top of my head. I really don't see how, or I cannot give you any sort of idea right now how we can interface with the academe more fully at this stage. But we are willing to work with you to discover such needs. Thank you.
Yes, I think the ethnographic research digitally and undertaken by Professor Ong uncovering mayoral and other politicians resorting to nefarious digital means is already a clear indication that they have a great deal to contribute to this discussion. So, ang sasabihin ko, kasi parati natin sinasabi yung coordinated behavior. Eh kapag eleksyon, talagang coordinated yan. Sasabihin ko na yung totoo. Ako may hinanakit, dyan sa mga takedown na yan noong March 2019. Maraming fan pages ng mga Marcos loyalist ang nadali dyan. Hindi namin hawak. They're not registered with the COMELEC because we have absolutely no control over these groups. And at the same time, we actually were mystified why they were taken down. They were like basic fan pages. But naturally, in the midst of a campaign, their actions were probably what could be called coordinated. So isa yun. At yung ikalawa, yung laging daing ng ating administrasyon, kung bakit yung fact-checker na ginagamit ng Facebook, yung dalawang tanyag na media na bumabatikos kay Presidente Duterte sa kada kilos halos, yung Rappler at yung Vera Files, bakit itinatag yan bilang gatekeeper, ika nga? So I think the politicizing question becomes very, very confused. Are there any insights into this problem? Yung tinatawag na fact-checker ng iba't ibang social media platforms.
Madam Chair.
Yes. Okay, I think Professor Ong muna, and then is that Yusek Mani who called?
Yes po, ma'am.
Sige. Si Professor Ong lang muna po.
Sure. Just to give an insight to other challenges in the region. So Facebook partners with fact checkers not just in the Philippines but in other countries, and there are some cases in which fact checkers have become much more explicit with their political alignment in other countries, such as India, where the fact check industry has kind of flourished, and they're able to kind of admit to their political alignment that they will only fact check politicians of a certain party. So there are those dangers. At the same time, we also have to recognize that journalists and fact checkers have done incredible work when it comes to fact checking and keeping politicians honest with regard to COVID, with regard to medical misinformation. So they have done a lot in terms of
Sure.
deepening our understanding around that. At the same
No,
time,
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that we don't need fact checkers. We absolutely require them. Yes.
yeah, and we in the academe also say that we also and here's where we can also contribute in term our expertise in political communication, that sometimes correcting disinformation as narratives rather than just as individual bad actors might be more effective. Dahil paminsan, kung fina-fact check mo isang influencer, isang account, you end up popularizing, parang mas marami pang tao will become curious kung sino sila, and that will expand the reach of a very dangerous false claim. So to understand, to contextualize a false claim as an entire narrative is more strategic. And when it comes to the electoral process, nakita natin ito sa US, parang narratives around the electoral process itself, whether we can trust the process and the outcome of the process. That is something that COMELEC should be paying attention to. parang disinformation that undermines the process of elections and the integrity of your organization and your independence. And that's something that, again, academics, journalists, and multi-stakeholder approach could help strengthen and provide support to you.
Yes, I think the whole simplistic system of fact checking as it operates today is inadequate, and a multi-stakeholder approach, dimensionally involving academics, traditional media, and stakeholders would probably be better rounded and more comprehensive. So, Yusek Manilang, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll give some examples as well, so para mas maging malinaw yung gagawin, yung aking description. So, yung unang question niyo, ma'am, yung posible bang, ang nangyayari ngayon, posibleng nagkaka-take down sa certain campaign websites as we're moving towards the 2022 elections, and if
Yes.
magsasuffer ng certain parang a bit of injustice, mafe-feel mo na parang may certain injustice yung campaign site mo, campaign page mo pwedeng ma-take down. Explain ko lang a bit how the Facebook CIP works sa pagkaintindi ko. So, posibleng tama naman ang pahina mo, ang page mo, that's a legit page. Pero pag napapansin po kasing may coordinated inauthentic behavior, meaning to say, marami-raming mga fake accounts. Hindi nyo kagagawan yon. May mga fake accounts na nagla-like, or nagpo-post doon sa legit page mo, pwede kayong ma-take down. Hindi dahil sadya mo yon, pero kung hindi, baka may nag-like lang ng whatever. So, ang gagawin po ng DICT ngayon, ma'am, in accordance with it, for the next few months is we're also helping government agencies, and it's also open to others, and education on how to properly manage the pages based on the new extensive guidelines of Facebook's inauthentic behavior. Wala tayong magagawa dahil yun yung kanilang patakaran. So, ang atin is para matulungan ang mga government agencies and even individuals maintaining their pages na hindi basta-bastang mas-CIB ng Facebook. Ituturuan natin, paano ba ngayon gumagana, paano mo na ba dapat minamanage ang pahina mo? Wala akong
So, Yusek Mani, anong maipapayo mo sa ating mga AFP at PNP na tinake down noong September? Paano sila magbabago na hindi sila tatawaging coordinated inauthentic behavior?
Ay, hindi po nila po yun kasalanan, ma'am. Posible pong ang tutulong po namin ngayon sa AFP at PNP, ang lahat ng yon is tuloy-tuloy po ang ating education based on these new guidelines. So, kumbaga, we have to start working within the rules of this.
Wala bang karapatan ng AFP at PNP gamitin ang social media sa kampanya laban sa CPP-NPA, halimbawa?
Meron po, ma'am. All the more po na dapat, ma'am. We do that, ma'am. We are in full support of that.
Ano yung violation nila? Bakit sila na-take down? Sa pakiwaring ninyo, tama ba yung ginawa ng Facebook?
Ay, hindi po ako privy doon sa particular violations na yan, ma'am. Ang akin po, ma'am, is yung moving forward.
Diba? Kasi nga, inauthentic behavior, noong September, tapos siyempre, todo alma, at ang gobyerno, galit na galit kung bakit bawal sa kanila gumamit ng Facebook, samantalang ang lahat ng sinasabing leftist, insurrection, ewan ko ba, lahat ng rebelde, talagang kalat na kalat, talamak ang kanilang recruitment sa Facebook pages. Anong masasabi ninyo? I don't know. Professor Ong, can you weigh in on this?
So, and this is a frustration of academics, and I'm sure, it sounds like government officials are equally frustrated that Facebook needs to be sharing their data, needs to be showing their methodologies when it comes to these takedowns, in also as a way to kind of neutralize accusations that they're being partisan. So, nagkaroon nga ng takedown, and ang tanong namin as academics when they did that was, bakit ngayon lang? And ano yung timing nila was, this happened before the US elections and over a year after itong mga accounts na to supposedly nag-influence ng discussions nung 2019 elections natin. So those kinds of questions, wala tayong transparency around that. And that's why nagkakaroon nga ng tech clash na parang nasaan ba yung accountability and responsibility ng Facebook. And that's why, again, the multi-stakeholder approach is necessary here. Multiple sets of eyes in order to look at the same set of data, in order for us to establish those checks and balances. Yes.
Yes, I think there's always been this exaggerated linkage between fake news and national security. Medyo parati yan ng dahilan sa magkabila at siguro isa pang kinakailangan liwanagin ng ating mga academics sa pag-aaralan ng maigi. There have also been professors who have indicated that there's a real threat of a China candidate or even 2 Manchurian candidates. So, ito yung kinatatakutan natin. Perhaps it's high time that we do, in fact, come up with a bill explicitly defining foreign interference as indicated in our Constitution, as indicated as well in our election laws, and providing more powers to a new task force. Hindi naman ito department na saksakan ng laki, pero siguro maliit lang na pagtitipon-tipon dahil bagong-bago pa itong area na ito at kinakailangan na liwanagin. Nang unti-unti, syempre very conservative. I agree with Professor Ong as well as with the COMELEC that we study this thoroughly and move very, very judiciously and prudently. So thank you. If there are no additions to these queries or to this debate, we shall move on to the 2022 election resolution of Senator Angara. To those who need not participate in the discussion regarding 2022 new normal elections, may I allow Professor Ong, Facebook Philippines, and the other stakeholders only invited for Senator Recto's resolution to leave the room. We will invite you, and for a further TWG, and in all likelihood, there will be many questions still to be raised. Thank you very much for your participation. Maraming salamat po. Okay. So, lilipat naman tayo, Comsec, sa bagong resolution mula kay Senator Angara. At siguro ang unang masasabi, maliwanag kay Presidente Duterte, tuloy na tuloy ang 2022. Sa mga umaasa na postpone ito o makakansela, sorry na lang, tuloy na po. So, having said that, I think it's important that we call on the COMELEC and the others involved to discuss the possibilities, the different scenarios that have been posited for these elections. Di ba may new normal kayo na committee that's already studying this? Spokesperson Jimenez, please.
Yes, Senator, we do have a new normal committee. It's being headed by Commissioner Richie Ko. And ang pinaka-flagship activity namin ngayon is this mapping project that we're having in Palawan. We call it informally a mapping project because we're basically mapping out how we're going to carry out elections under pandemic conditions. So it's a mapping experience where we'll find out if the methods that we are deploying will be effective and actually efficient as a means to control transmission during on election day and thereafter.
Yung mapping ba ng new normal committee ninyo, does that have to do with the different modes that you will undertake, the different techniques, or is this mapping simply with regard to the automated election?
No, ma'am. This is with regard to the entire electoral process from the very start all the way up to the very end. No? Ang hindi lang po kasama dito sa mapping na to ay yung mga legislative solutions na syempre wala naman kaming control dyan, ano, kung matutuloy man o hindi.
Yes.
So ang sa amin po, yung mga procedures at practices na ginagawa ng COMELEC sa elections. Again, the Palawan plebiscite is manual, so a lot of the procedures that we are trying out are also based or can scale to manual elections.
I've heard and I've been asked so many different options, ano? So paramount sa atin lahat is the increased cost, time, and personnel required to meet the standards for COVID protocols. Magiging malaking sagabal ba to? Kasi as we know, dapat may face mask, may shield. Many people have recommended testing. Tapos changing the venues dahil dapat malaki. Ideally, outdoors. Paano kaya yon?
Yes, ma'am. These are very real concerns, and in fact, nakikita natin to na in operation sa Palawan. Let's just talk about first yung safety precautions natin.
Yes.
Dito sa paghahanda namin sa Palawan plebiscite, we're already expanding our timetable to include early arrival in Palawan so that we can take into consideration yung quarantine requirements nung Palawan. So
anong oras mag-uumpisa yung expanded timetable? Mas maaga kayo, ganon?
Ma'am, yes ma'am. We're already mobilizing now for a plebiscite that's happening in March pa. No?
Kaya nga, pero for example, just run me through the schedule of election day.
Yes ma'am.
Anong oras kayo magbubukas? Or
Okay.
i-expand ba yan sa 2 or 3 days?
Ma'am, hindi po. Yung mismong election day starts at 7 in the morning and we will hold elections until 3 in the afternoon. No? Ang adjustment natin sa Palawan is specifically to increase the number of polling places and correspondingly lower the number of voters per polling place. So that kung dati...
So it's actually not an expanded timetable. Halos pareho pa rin. Yun nga lang, mas maraming polling place at saka babawasan yung botante kada polling area.
Yes, ma'am. I apologize. Yung expanded timetable meant yung preparations namin.
Yung preparations.
Earlier, than
Okay.
before. Opo. So magsisimula po kami nitong February so that by middle of February, a lot of our resources and personnel will be already on site. No? Kasi nga, kailangan natin i-accommodate yung 14-day na quarantine requirements. We'll also be including in our supplies, the procurements, yung mga personal protective equipment, including face masks and face shields, rubber gloves.
So clearly, this is not the skill set of COMELEC. So you have to call on the DOH and the municipal health workers and so on.
Nagko-coordinate po kami sa local health authorities, and itong buong proseso ng Palawan plebiscite was also planned out in coordination with the Department of Health and IATF. And we will follow the same model for the 2022 elections.
Anong naiisip mo para sa 2022 in as much as may instructions tayo na ituloy yan ni Presidente Duterte? What do you have in mind? Because there have been so many modalities mooted, causing alarm in certain sectors. So yung isa, yung extended, yung 2 to 3 days, at saka combined with early voting, which I think is entirely reasonable naman dahil sa ating mga elderly, yung ating PWD, yung mga ibang sundalo at police that will be on duty on that day. What are your thoughts? Can we actually conduct a 2 to 3 day national election o mas lalo magkakagulo tuwing gabi?
Ma'am, medyo worry kami sa 2 to 3 days of election. The COMELEC is actually tending towards longer election hours. Nakikita po natin sa ibang bansa, especially yung mga malalaking elections, they do have elections that last for up to 12 hours. And so yung tendency po ng COMELEC right now, the predisposition of COMELEC right now is to go towards longer election hours and perhaps smaller precinct sizes.
I see.
Opo. But as far as the 2 to 3 days of elections, as you pointed out, there's been a lot of concern about that. There's a lot of worry about what happens at night, I suppose. So, overall po, ang takbo ng pag-iisip ng COMELEC ngayon is towards longer election days, possibly an extension at the end of the day.
Kung mag-re-precinct kayo, ibig sabihin you limit the precincts talaga, yung totohanan ng 500 voters kada. Hindi na lolobo sa Quezon City ng mga 800-900 kahit pilitin natin maging 500.
Yes, ma'am. Malamang ganun po ang mangyayari. No? But that will also, again, have an impact on the physical preparations naman. Because kakailanganin natin ng mas malaking mga espasyo at mas malalaking lugar.
Kaya nga, kasi dadami yan.
Yes po, ma'am. And syempre, dadami rin ang ating personnel
So
requirements.
you need more places. Yeah, you have eskwelahan, indoors yan. Marami sa kanila, wala namang cross-ventilation. So, baka maghanap tayo ng stadium. I think a combination of longer hours perhaps and early voting. Sino ang papayagan natin mag-early voting?
Maganda po yung early voting, and right now the thinking is to give vulnerable sectors particular priority dyan sa early voting. We're talking about senior citizens and perhaps persons with disabilities. So the smaller populations of those particular subgroups will make it very easy, relatively easy to conduct early voting for them. Right now po kasi ang early voting natin, of course, alam niyo naman, limited to government officials and media.
May recommendation rin na yung ibang early voting pwede ng mail-in o pwede na rin daw ibang means. Anong tingin mo? Kasi lahat kinakabahan sa ganyan.
Ma'am, yung mail voting kasi while we're willing to explore that possibility, the fact is for mail voting to work, we need really the postal service. Not so much.
Yes.
COMELEC will take charge of the mail once it has been received by us. Pero yung process of getting it to us is something out of our control. So, mas marami
under this so-called mapping project, are you able to identify or are you open to identifying together with PhilPost that is undertaking a very expensive computerization effort? Are you willing to identify some pilot precincts? Para lang masubukan yung mail-in, para masubukan yung ibang mga modes na rin-recommend.
Ma'am, willing po ang COMELEC makipag-ugnayan sa PhilPost. Pero ma'am, just to manage expectations, malabo na pong magawa natin yan for the Palawan plebiscite kasi sa March na po yan. Ano? But,
hindi, for 2022 naman itong hearing na to. For 2022, halimbawa, yung mail-in voting sa ibang lugar, tapos i-beef up ng PhilPost yung kanilang capacity kasi bago pa lang yung computerization. Parang experiment lang, I don't know. Or experiment sa early voting, di ko alam. Para sa seniors kasi maraming alma doon sa ating PWD lalo.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, subject syempre to confirmation of our bank. Mukha namang wala namang kaming magiging objections to studying this matter with PhilPost. No? And
kasi
opo.
Pinagmamalaki nila, matatapos na daw yung computerization nila. Eh sabi ko, magpakitang gilas kayo, mag-identify kayo kung saan at kung anong eleksyon ang pwede natin pasukan, kung sa early voting o kung saan. Actually, we're already doing mail-in voting, di ba, sa absentee. So perhaps we can call on our overseas voting group from DFA as well kung meron silang masasabi or yung iba pang representatives na narito pa rin. Kanina si Mr. Castro galing DFA, overseas voting yata yung pinag-usapan. Yes, Mr. Castro, please.
Ed, you're muted.
Yes, Mr. Castro, our concern here in the Senate is despite many, many efforts to finance properly and adequately the overseas voting effort, we continue to have very, very low turnouts. Is there anything that we can do between the COMELEC and the DFA and the other groups? Wala ka pong audio. Mr. Castro, paki-on lang ng audio, hindi ka naririnig. Oh, there we go. Thanks. Okay, our concern is the exceedingly low turnout, given the finance, the effort, the personnel involved. Wala na naman. Na-mute ka na naman. Sorry. DFA, please. Yung audio lang.
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me now, please?
Yes, there we go.
Yes. Yes, ma'am. Yes, in proportion to the increase in registration that we have experienced in the past elections, definitely the voter turnout has been lagging, although the voter turnout has also increased in comparison to all the previous elections since the beginning of overseas voting. We are currently supporting an exploration study of COMELEC right now to include new technologies for overseas voting. And hopefully this exploration will turn out successful, and it would be acceptable also for the legislature to allow for the use of perhaps internet voting.
Nako, maraming nagpapanik sa mga pahiwatig na ganyan. But I know that Commissioner Guanzon, for one, has been proposing that and conducted some meetings, in fact, with the OFWs who are very much in favor of that. But of course, our cybersecurity concerns continue to dominate. Anong tingin ninyo? How real is that? Or are we willing, actually, like with regard to mail-in voting domestically, are we willing or able to conduct overseas online voting in certain pilot areas, or is it still too risky?
Bab, we are planning in collaboration with COMELEC to have test mock voting sometime end of this month, early February. And depending on the results of that experiment, we would be in a better position to assess the existing technologies.
Where did you hope to undertake online voting? Saan yan? Which territory?
Ma'am, we're planning to do it for all our posts since it's just a mock election.
I see.
At the end of, and I think
all internationally.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. That's the only way to test the technology.
Aren't you dooming yourself to failure? Hindi ba mas maigi i-pilot muna sa mga tried and tested na matindi ang digital infrastructure?
Ma'am, that would also be our way of assessing on realistically on where the technology would work. So, so we will try it in all regions.
All regions at the same time within the month.
Yes,
very
ma'am.
ambitious. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Is the COMELEC participating in this mock election online?
They are actually taking the lead, ma'am. Last month, they were the four potential suppliers for the technology briefed the COMELEC and then briefed a bigger group, which included the DFA. And now I believe that the Office of Overseas Voting of COMELEC is currently working with those suppliers to be able to schedule the mock elections.
Yes. Any word from COMELEC with regard to this mock election? Of course, there are very broad concerns about the security involved.
Yes, ma'am. But the mock elections for online voting right now is really limited in application to overseas voting only. And there have been previous mock elections using online voting, and then we see that there are a lot of security measures in place, and which can be put in place by these different suppliers. Kaya nga po, susubukan muna natin. But again, just to manage expectations, we still have to have authority from Congress to actually deploy an online voting system. Right now, the authority of the COMELEC is limited to testing out alternative means of voting. So this is one of those alternative means that we're testing.
I see. So you're only allowed to test
Yes,
right
ma'am.
now.
Yes,
Kaya
ma'am.
puro mock election lang ang ginagawa ng DFA at pati na rin ng COMELEC kasi wala pa sa batas. Ganun ba yun?
Wala pa po sa batas, yes, ma'am.
Okay. I think the concerns arose again after the Iowa primaries in the last presidential elections where napakaliit lang ng numero ng botante tatlot kalahating araw bago naglabasan yung resulta, no? So it happens in the most high-tech jurisdictions such as the US, and these mobile voting apps are not infallible, clearly.
Yes, ma'am.
So I think there is also an effort. We've talked about the lack of COMELEC personnel. There's also been an effort to deputize enforcement agencies and LGUs and so on, to deputize even our NAMFREL, PPCRB, and the other election watchdogs to help us in the effort of 2022. Are you still considering that at COMELEC, yung mag-deputize ng mga PNP, AFP, and others?
Yes, ma'am. Pangkaraniwan po na nagde-deputize tayo ng iba't ibang mga ahensya o entities, no? As far as the private entities are concerned, for instance, NAMFREL and PCRV, what they do is they seek accreditation as citizens' arms and for specific portfolios. And yes, ma'am, itutuloy po natin yung ganyang procedure.
Pero walang pagbabago dyan? Walang pagbabago sa deputizing? Kasi, syempre, mas matagal to. You'll need so many batches, 12 hours. Hirap na yung mga teacher dyan at yung mga COMELEC, bagsak na siguro sa trabaho.
Ma'am, magkakaroon po tayo ng pag-uusap, syempre, sa Department of Education for our requirements, no, particularly sa pagpapatakbo ng ating mga electoral boards. But we do have a law regarding service on election day for teachers. Pero po yung ating mga private partners like halimbawa NAMFREL and PPCRV, sa ibang aspeto po sila ng election management pumapasok. For instance, PPCRV, they normally deploy assistance desks. So that's probably what they're going to be proposing to do for 2022 as well. NAMFREL is more on the technical side, particularly sa random manual audit kung magkakaroon ng automated elections.
Yes, I think there were also proposals if there was going to be live streaming and additional security features that they would be involved upon COMELEC accreditation, of course. I'd like to call on Senator Francis Tolentino, who appears to have a question. Francis? Wala kang audio. Senator Tolentino, please.
Can you hear me? Ma'am, ang isa lang yung point ko, siguro the COMELEC should at this early stage look into the matter and situation.
Pwedeng laksan konti, Senator Tolentino, medyo mahina.
Yan, can you hear me now?
Ayan, perfect. DJ na DJ ang dating mo,
Wala.
Okay na. Ay, nawala na naman ang audio ni Senator Tolentino.
Can you hear me now?
Ayun, okay.
So, just one interjection. Siguro at this early stage, COMELEC should look into the plight of our seafarers. If my records and recollection would prove me right, I think we supply a third or a fourth or more than a fourth of seafarers around the world. And the seafarers cannot vote.
Correct. Yeah.
Cannot vote because while they are at sea, they're being required to go to the nearest consular post or station. How can you do that? So this would require technology. This would require a lot of innovation on the part of COMELEC. How to do this? I really don't know. So ang laki po nawawalang boto at sila po yung gustong bumoto.
Oo.
Ang duty nila 6 months, 6 months. Yung seaman's book, yung contract nila. So how do we address this problem? And we're not looking at all consular posts. Konti lang po to. You're looking at Rotterdam. You're looking at the big ports of Berlin and perhaps New York or perhaps Los Angeles. Konti lang po to. Can COMELEC devise a method on how to how we should allow the seafarers to exercise their right of suffrage? Yun lang po, Madam Chair. And thank you for allowing me to test my microphone.
Bagets na bagets tayo, hindi na headphone na. Okay. Oo, matinding tanong yan, matagal ng problema. Kasi magagaling pa naman magpadala ng pera, involved pa naman sa mga social media platforms yung mga seaman, pero ang ending, hindi makaboto. Ano kaya ang magagawa natin para tulungan sila?
Madam Senator, Mr. Senator, right now meron po tayong tinatawag natin vote anywhere para sa mga seaman, ano? Which means whatever port they make, whatever port they're in, they can actually go to the consular office or embassy there and actually vote. Ang problema po, katulad na sinabi nga ni Senator Francis, hindi naman sila palaging naka-dock. So what happens if they don't dock during the 30-day voting period? So ang tinitingnan po ng COMELEC dito, ito nga yung ating online voting is one way of meeting that need. They have shipboard internet. So if we have an online voting system using internet technology, then posible pong makaboto yung mga seafarers natin habang sila ay naglalayag. Ang problema po natin ngayon, since wala tayo niyan, limitado tayo sa abilities natin, and what we do is, as an accommodation to seafarers, is that we allow them to vote anywhere. So as long as they're making port of call, there's an embassy or a consulate there, then they can vote there.
Hindi pa ba pwede, in addition to vote anywhere, pwede bang habaan yung 30 days para lang sa seafarers? Kasi takot pa tayo sa online, wala pa tayong in place na security features. Is it possible to extend the voting period para lang sa kanila? Dahil yun nga, nakalaot sila ng 6 na buwan, paano naman natin sisiguraduhin na makaka-furlough yung mga yan? Senator Tolentino, please.
Yes, just one last point, Madam Chair. Perhaps the COMELEC, and I'm giving them some headways, should take into consideration if it is a Philippine flag vessel, which is considered part of Philippine soil, and they should be allowed to vote anywhere because that's part of Philippine territory, or perhaps deputizing the ship captain if the ship captain is a Filipino. Our existing laws would even show, and the former Senate President Pimentel can prove me right, that even ship captains are allowed to conduct marriage ceremonies, etc., etc. So there are considerations given to a ship captain, but a Filipino vessel is part of Philippine territory, and for sure a methodology can be devised that would allow them to vote within Philippine territory. I suppose, Madam Chair. Salamat po.
Yes, I agree, Senator Tolentino. We need to be very creative about this because we are basically depriving our hardworking seafarers of their fundamental right to vote. Any random thoughts from DFA and COMELEC? I will not hold you to this. Obviously, this is more of brainstorming than position and policy laying. Yes, Mr. Castro, please.
Yes, ma'am. I think the issue, the challenges with the seafarers are twofold. One, they don't really know when they're going to be on board and when they're going to be back in the Philippines. And once you register as an overseas voter, and the registration period ends, it's no long they will no longer be able to transfer the registration back to local here in the Philippines.
Akala
They
ko sabi ng COMELEC na vote anywhere.
vote anywhere abroad po. But that precludes them from voting locally because they will already be registered as an overseas voter. So
bakit
this
dapat
has-
COMELEC, kung pwede silang vote anywhere abroad, mas lalong dapat vote in the Philippines pwede, di ba?
So this situation has discouraged seafarers from registering as overseas voters. The current rate of registration we have, they are a very small percentage of the registered voters. It's about less than 2%, ma'am, for overseas voting.
I see. What was the other problem?
Precisely
So
because
one
they are
was
this issue that they don't know whether they're going to be in the Philippines or
Philippines.
overseas.
I see.
And so they would rather keep the option of being able to vote here if they are here.
O siguro kung seafarer, pwede nang gawa ng paraan ng COMELEC yan na kung hindi nila alam kung kailan sila lalayag, pwede naman kung vote anywhere, more so sa Pilipinas. Pwede ba yon sa COMELEC? Pag-usapan na lang, ano?
Pag-usapan na lang siguro, Senator, pero kasi right now, pag nasa Pilipinas ka, if you're voting domestically, then geographic po yan. So kailangan ka naka-assign sa isang polling place. Nagiging vote anywhere lamang yan kapag sila ay overseas or nasa barko.
I see. So it's geographically limited kapag nandito. Pero parang mali. Pag nasa abroad, mas maluwag. Pag nasa sariling bansa, hindi ka papayagan. Parang baliktad naman yata yung mundo.
Chair.
Yes, Senator Pimentel, please.
Paano kung isali natin sila, James, sa system ng local absentee voting? Parang gano'n.
Yes, tama.
Na pwede sila, kasi anyway, yung vote anywhere nila abroad, limited din naman yun sa party list, senators, vice president, and president, the same as local absentee voting. So, pag-aralan nyo nga, kasi di ba, ang local absentee voting, in-expand natin for the media eh.
Yes, ma'am.
So, siguro, a little amendment to the law, we can also include them. Pero choice nila, but there must be a system to detect that they have already voted, di ba? So that they can only vote once.
Yes.
Tama. Yes, I think all these creative ideas are really urgently necessary so that we can finally capture the seafarers' vote. Mr. Castro, you said there was another problem in addition to the fact na hindi nila alam kung kailan sila lalayag.
Yeah, and then the second one, ma'am, is that the reason is that there's very low registration on the part of seafarers as overseas voters, because they're discouraged by the fact that since they don't know when they will be during election time.
I see.
Therefore, they keep their options open for being able to vote here, and as a result, they don't register as overseas voter.
I see. Yes, that's correct. So, isa pa, maraming returning OFW, rinereklamo nila baka hindi na sila qualified to vote sa 2022. Daan-daan libo yan na napauwi dahil sa COVID. Paano natin i-register yung nauwi? Kawawa naman. Nawalan na ng trabaho, nawalan pa ng boto. James, ano kaya? Meron tayong special program para sa mga repatriated OFWs?
Ma'am, Mr. Castro pointed out, no, isa sa pinakamalaking issue dyan yung mga voters mismo ayaw magparehistro sa local kasi hindi nila alam kung kailan sila makakabalik overseas, and a lot of the times, and in our radio program, yung Radyo Comelec, we deal with this often. Tinatanong ng mga tao kung kailan ba sila magpaparehistro sa local kung hindi sila sure kung sila ay makakabalik pa wherever, saan sila na-deploy, no? And the answer is always the same. We have until August of this year to file your transfer kung talagang desidido na kayo magparehistro sa Pilipinas. Otherwise, it's their option to stay registered sa overseas voting system, in which case, kung OVS sila, but they're not abroad on election day, hindi sila makakaboto dito sa Pilipinas.
Nako, kailangan natin ng massive information campaign kasi marami sa kanila hindi alam na pwede pa pala magrehistro until August. And perhaps we can consider also for repatriated OFWs to apply the same seafarers vote anywhere rule. Kung saan man sila ma-deploy kasi hindi pa nga nila alam, pwede rin sila bumoto ron. Pwede kaya yun? Kasi returning
sa OVS, sa aming overseas voting committee.
siguro pwede na rin sila vote anywhere kasi hindi naman sila sigurado kung saan madideploy pa.
Sasangguni ko po yan sa aming overseas voting office.
Sige, thank you very much. Any further questions or insights into this effort? Yung ating mga stakeholders, kung meron kayong maidadagdag sa ating new normal na papalo sa 2022. Is that Mr. Del Rosario, please? Are you raising your hand po?
Yes.
Yes po. Are you speaking? Kasi yung audio po nila hindi na naririnig.
Hello.
Ayun. Naririnig ko kayo. Thank you.
I'm Ernie Del Rosario.
Yes,
Can you
po.
hear me?
Yes, very well. Thank you.
I'm the former IT director of Comelec.
Yes.
So I retired in 2009. I was the project director of the internet voting in 2007, which was very successful.
Yes, you've
piloted
come
in-
for this committee before. We know you po. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for accommodating me. Yeah, I just want to tell a short story of the Singapore pilot back in September 2007. So there were many voters, OFW, who voted from many countries. There was zero hacking, zero, totally. So many nations, or so many people, hackers coming from several nations, pero walang naging nakalusot. So our fear of this cybersecurity, although we still recommended strengthening our cybersecurity, the network on, because we have a small glitch, a short one, but it was successful in terms of satisfaction of the voters. All the components of satisfaction were rated more than 90% rating. So sayang, we don't need a pilot anymore. We did that in Singapore in 2007.
So that was online, you're saying po?
Yes,
Was that
yes.
online? Was it mail in?
It was online, totally online.
I see.
So the other thing that we wanted to add is the online registration using voice biometrics, which Germany police is using successfully voice biometrics.
I see.
So the OFW voters will no longer have to go to the embassy to register. We are removing that. Because that's one of the problems. If people are working, the OFW are working,
First.
hindi sila mabahala. So, pwedeng online registration, online voting.
I see. Thank you very much. Maybe James, can you react to that? presumably technology is much better now than it was in 2007, and we were able to do it now in 2007. Kaya mauulit.
Yeah.
Yes, Senator. Unfortunately, I agree. Tama po si Director Del Rosario. We were both present nung test na yun. And yes, it was very successful. Unfortunately, hindi po siya na-follow up with an enabling law. So, nag-pilot test tayo pero hindi naging batas yung authorization sa COMELEC na magpa-online voting. Kaya po inuulit natin yung proseso essentially ngayon. No?
I see.
Opo. So, kaya tayo nagpa-pilot ulit. Although, tama nga, meron na tayong pilot na kumbaga, experience. We feel that perhaps now that would just add to the weight of authority that says that online voting is doable and safe. As for voice biometrics, I have to admit there might be issues with building up the database of voice. Meron po tayong database ng fingerprints, etc.
Fingerprinting. Oo.
Pero iba yung voice po kasi.
Okay, pero ang sa ganon, it's not for lack of technology. Perhaps to assuage the fears of those who are opposing online and mail-in, baka pwede natin i-explore muna yung online registration. Kahit hindi muna boto, yung registration man lang unahin na, no? Kasi hindi nga makapasok sa listahan eh.
Ma'am, I think meron pong pending online registration na batas.
Yes, I think there are several bills.
Yes po. So sana po matuloy po.
Okay, thank you. So okay ang COMELEC to work with that.
Yes,
Not
po.
necessarily with the technology of voice biometrics, but with some other forms perhaps. Okay, thank you very much. I think Senator Villar is here, Senator Pimentel. If there are no further queries, we can end this discussion and derive perhaps from our resource persons the official updated report ng new normal so far ng ating COMELEC. I see Eric Alvia. Did you want to add something, Eric, please? I'm sorry. Hirap ako sa audio mo. Ayan, si Senator Coco rin at si Senator Francis. Can you try your audio again? Medyo basag yung boses mo, Eric. I'm not able to understand eh. Okay. If you could, please type in na lang in the chat box or send us your query. I also have in the chat box a notice from Lente. May comment ata kayo. Maybe we invite Lente muna until Eric resolves his audio. Sinong representative ng Lente?
Hi, good morning, Madam
Okay.
Chair.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. So, hi, I'm Attorney Helen Graido from the Legal Network for Truthful Elections. So, our group, given the importance that we place on the value of conducting periodic elections, at the start of the pandemic, we've been very vigilant in observing the elections that have been conducted in other jurisdictions. Kasi titingnan namin like how will they actually proceed with elections given the challenges of the COVID-19 transmission and the risks. So as early as April, we've started consultations with public health experts, with election law experts, and even technology experts. Kasi tinitingnan namin yung mga ways or yung mga innovative ways which we can use, which we can implement in our electoral process. And from those consultations, we were able to come up with a framework for the upcoming elections, particularly for the 2022 national and local elections. So we call it the safe democratic electoral process. So the steps here would involve first a risk assessment based on the trends in the past electoral exercises. which would first identify yung mga activities within the electoral cycle that would raise the risk of transmission. So titingnan natin kung sa anong parte ng registration, anong part ng canvassing or ng counting, and even part ng campaign yung very high risk as to for example for crowd magnets, for those that would entail a lot of face-to-face interactions. And second, the risk assessment should include identifying activities that would be impacted by the requirements of quarantine. Like for example, if you are positive for COVID-19 on the day of election, how will you not be disenfranchised by the fact that you need to be quarantined somewhere else and not being able to go to your respective polling place? The risk assessment should also include identification of points which are very high risk for disenfranchisement. Kasi when we were consulting with the experts, with public health, with election law and technology experts, na-identify nila na yes, like nasabi ni Director James, of course, we will be implementing the face mask, face shield requirement, pero tinitingnan din natin siya as an economical hindrance or an economical or a property requirement. For example, sa
Mahirap
ating
kasi yun eh, kasi hanggang ngayon, tama ka, at hindi na-raise kanina, hanggang 14 days pa rin ang papasok at papalabas ng ibang
yes.
probinsya. Kung nasa Metro Manila ka, estudyante ka, paano ka boboto?
Mhm.
Ang hirap kaya nun, uuwi ka pa, tapos magbabayad ka pa, pupunta ka pa dun sa kung saan. Iba-iba kasi yung mga quarantine requirements ng probinsya. You're right, they're not even uniform.
Yes, actually, Senator, Madam Chair, we also identified the requirements of the face mask, the face shield can be property requirements that could disenfranchise some vulnerable groups of voters. Even the tests that are required before you enter into the provinces where you should be voting. So we need to identify those points for that are at the risk of disenfranchising certain groups of voters.
Parang halos lahat ng probinsya magsisibuwian yan. Paano ba yun? Lahat ng estudyante natin di makakaboto. 14 days.
Yes, ma'am. Yun nga eh. And also,
Tapos
they
hindi
have to
naman
pay
nila
for the
afford
test.
yung mga, mas mura na ngayon yung antigen. Pero may ibang probinsya, very strict, nagre-require ng PCR.
Yes po. And right now, the prices of RT-PCR is around 3,500 up to 5,500. So it's really burdensome for some sectors of the voting population. Another would be
For us, in our case, for example, going to Ilocos, the buses are not yet in operation.
Yes.
As you well know. So even if you are keen to go home, you can't, and you have the money, you don't have a bus.
Yes, true. And also, there's also a push for, of course, we are encouraging to limit face-to-face interactions. For example, as the campaign, there's a push for going digital, but we also have to be very wary of the digital divide that is existing in the country. I mean, not everyone would have the hardware to go to social media platforms to read the pages of COMELEC, of the candidates that they would want to support, to read the platforms from these internet channels. So that's one. And then another part of the risk assessment would be to identify points which can be weaponized, wherein the rules can be weaponized against stakeholders. For example, the triaging process, like right now, the upcoming Palawan plebiscite, the rules that have already been promulgated by COMELEC would include a triaging process. They would check the body temperature, and if you don't pass that test, you'll be required to be checked up by a medical personnel. So these points, they could be very helpful again in managing the risk of transmission. But we also have to take into consideration that these steps can also be weaponized to exclude and to disenfranchise certain sectors of the voting population for the political gain of a certain side of or a certain candidate. Isa rin po dyan would be like for example during the campaign, of course, we encourage we encourage the observance of occupancy limits, but yung implementation po ng mga occupancy limits na yon during the campaign can again be weaponized against a specific political party or specific candidates. What we want to put emphasis in is to always strike a balance between, of course, observing the minimum health standards, placing priority on that, and also trying to be very vigilant on weaponizing these rules and to not and for these rules to not be ways to disenfranchise candidates, to disenfranchise the voters and other stakeholders. So, and lastly, on top of it all, of course, we would want to push for a very inclusive decision-making process that all the actors, political parties, candidates, the voters should be included in the decision-making process. Our group, we've allotted a lot of time in consulting with different stakeholders, including mga political parties po, kasi we presented to them the steps or the standards that could be observed and what do they think about it. Kasi like for example, for campaign, we know that the operators for this part of the electoral cycle are those that are administrators of political parties. So they'll be the ones who are number one in actually complying with the rules. So they need to be consulted kung possible pa ba siya, kung feasible pa ba siya for the group.
Okay.
So yes, ma'am. And then sorry, ma'am. Lastly,
Yes, I think Lent has been very diligent about submitting position papers, and given that
Yes.
you've conducted several focus group discussions,
Mhm.
your findings and concrete recommendations would be very welcome to this committee.
Mhm. Yes, ma'am. We'll also forward here the draft of a code of conduct that is a product of these consultations. These would cover from registration until the post-election activities, wherein we identified standards that should be observed by each actor, each stakeholder
Okay.
in each stage cycle. Thank you.
Sige,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
abangan na lang namin. And then last but not least, I just got a message from Dr. PM Hernandez of UP College of Public Health with very valuable input from the WHO, given that they have some findings already. We invite Dr. Hernandez, please.
Hi, good morning po. I'm Dr. Hernandez from the UP College of Public Health. Hopefully you can hear me adequately. Okay. So, hello. Good morning po. Okay, all right. So thank you for thank you for giving me a chance to share
Sorry.
my inputs on this matter. So I forwarded the correct link. Apologies for sending the incorrect one. But this is the WHO interim guidelines or guidance for holding elections and other democratic activities in light of the pandemic. Based on these
According to your
guidelines po,
message, basically, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to go to the meat of the matter so that COMELEC could explore the link together with DFA, together with DICT, to explore this very valuable link from Dr. Hernandez, wherein the finding was that electoral participation was maintained and even expanded on account of special voting arrangements adopted by various jurisdictions. Ito na yung pinag-uusapan natin, James, at ni Senator Coco, na anong sinabi ni Dr. Postal voting, advanced voting, mobile voting, assisted voting, proxy voting. So maybe, Doctor, we can focus on those recommendations and get to the heart of the matter.
okay. Regarding that po, so based on the WHO guidelines, there should be special arrangements. Well, number one, for persons on quarantine or isolation, yun po yung isang consideration. Number two, per high-risk voters, nabanggit po yung mga persons with disabilities, saka senior citizens. And number three, even the staff po, they should also be considered, particularly those of high risk. So they should not be deployed in the during the voting process po. So those are the recommendations regarding remote voting and institution-based voting po, Madam Chair. Thank you.
I see. James, you are cognizant of these studies of the WHO.
Yes, ma'am. We're very cognizant of the need to safeguard the right to vote of even those persons who are caught by the triage. Katulad po na nabanggit kanina ng Lente, no, na meron tayong triage na procedure kung saan itinatabi natin yung mga 37.8 na tao. Pero meron din po kasi kaming hiwalay na polling precinct para sa mga ganyang klaseng tao. Pinag-aaralan natin ngayon yung ginagawa sa ibang bansa, yung dinadala yung balota doon sa mismong mga quarantine centers. So these are being studied right now, and we hope since sa Palawan is not a big problem pa, it's not a big issue muna, but certainly sa 2022 magiging malaking issue yan. There will be more people who will be in quarantine, who will be allowed to vote otherwise. Kaso hindi yan sila pwedeng tanggalan ng right to vote just because may sakit sila. So
that's right.
Opo.
Clearly 2022 will be much bigger. Yung ginagawa na natin, napag-usapan na natin yung advanced postal mobile voting, yung assisted voting, ginagawa na rin, 'di ba, sa ating mga senior citizens, yung proxy voting na nandito sa presentation ni Dr. Hernandez. Ano ba ibig sabihin nun, Doktor? May boboto in your behalf? Mag-a-assign ka? May SPA ka, kumbaga? Doc?
Ma'am, the proxy voting was from NAMFREL.
Yes, that's right.
From NAMFREL, Mr. Alvia.
No, it's also contained in the WHO link.
Okay po.
I have
Okay
it
po.
open in front of me kasi I was wondering kung ano yung ini-imagine na proxy vote.
Yes, Madam Chair, if I may po. So I'm not sure of how to operationalize it, but in proxy voting, you can request another person to vote on your behalf.
Yeah, parang pagkaintindi ko, parang kang may SPA na may boboto para sa iyo, gano'n.
Parang ganun nga po.
Ewan, di ko alam. Any ideas, James? Senator Bong Revilla is with us.
Bawal po sa atin yan, may batas tayo.
Ayan, bawal na bawal sa atin yan.
Yes.
Senator Coco, papayag ba tayo dyan sa proxy voting?
Hello. Wala.
Hello, yes, Coco. Yung audio mo, parang patay yata.
Hello.
Yes, there we go. Yan.
Naghang na, ma'am.
Oo, ayan. Pero okay lang. Naririnig ka naman.
That requires major amendment to our election code.
Yun na nga, sobrang overhaul nun. Kind of overturns all the basic policies contained in election law. Paano kaya yan? Yeah, so...
Anyway, it's just a recommendation.
Yun na nga. It's just off the top of my head, I'm wondering how they're doing it in other jurisdictions out of curiosity since we're obliged to explore all options. Thank you.
Thank you.
James, maraming salamat, Dr. and Eric. I think Eric and Dr. Hernandez are referring to the same WH document that I have in front of me and that James is very familiar with as well. So if our senators have no further questions, Senator Villar, Senator Coco, Francis, Senator Bong Revilla, if there are no further comments, we will suspend this hearing. Marami pa kasing iba't ibang bill tungkol sa eleksyon. Tuloy-tuloy lang po tayo. Thank you very much for your participation. May we indeed be able to COVID-proof the 2022 elections, and let us not underestimate the challenges of the Palawan plebiscite that's forthcoming in March. Dahil papunta lang sa Northern Palawan, mahirap na, James. Kaya ingat din tayo dyan paghandaan ng maigi. Thank you very much to everyone, and happy birthday to former chairman, our Senate President, Coco Pimentel. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye-bye.
Happy birthday po, Senator Coco.